Today, we're going to be battling it out with the Garen community. There's been a bunch of creative new ways to build and play this champion that I just straight disagree with. Therefore, in this video, I'm going to be debating with 3 Garen OTPs of different ranks to settle this once and for all. Falco, I've noticed a lot of builds where you skip Stride Breaker. I think this is Camille skipping Triforce levels of, you just can't do that.
I feel like Shroudbreaker is one of the least gold efficient items.
As for our Garen players, we have Palco, a multi-season challenger Garen main, Elo, who's our Masters Garen player, and Ethan, a student of mine who's climbed up from Silver all the way to Emerald only using Garen. He will be the voice of the average player, because as we all know, anyone who's Masters Plus, myself included, has no life and plays the game way too much, so we need a voice of the people. But let's find out exactly the right way to play Garen and get this video started. Alright, everyone, so I'm gonna get started with the most exciting topic right away, the one I'm most excited to talk about, Spellbook versus Conqueror. So to quickly give some context here, recently Palco, our challenger Garen, he cooked up a setup into range, where he runs Spellbook with TP. TP was more so last season, but with Second Wind, and the reasoning here is it's pretty hard to get onto people to proc Phase Rush to proc Conqueror. So if you can comfortably get to Stride, using the utility from Spellbook, you'll be in a really good position against Teemo, against most ranged top laners. So my problem with that, my take on Garen, personally, is to run Conqueror Ignite in pretty much every matchup so that you can play for early game advantages, because most players you verse, 99% of range top players are going to be making dozens of spacing mistakes. But if you have a weak setup, running around with your spellbook and your cookies, you're not really going to be able to punish them. So, Falco, I'd love to get your current stance on this.
So when it comes to Spellbook, I don't really view it as a completely stonewall your matchup type of rune. Like in the past, it was more like I came up with it for that reason because I was always losing to like Dokla on Jace and all kinds of really good pro players in solo queue because they don't really make spacing errors. So every time I tried to play like Phase Rush Ignite or Conquer Ignite versus them, I tried it plenty, but I'd always go down like 30 CS, and I feel like those runes wouldn't get much value unless my jungler path top. Because what I could do versus really good players is trade their flash with my flash, and they would absolutely have to respect it because of the damage. But then like predictability of solo queue is like non-existent. Like you do not know what your team wants to do. You have no clue. Maybe if you like type to them a bunch, but that's pretty inconsistent. So what I really like about Spellbook is that it adapts to the situation. And so I think in solo queue it's just incredibly strong because it's all about consistency. If you fall behind on Garen even slightly, your champion has no recourse. It doesn't really have any utility. You're not like a Scion that can like still R or have this giant rectangle that, airborns. You're just Garen. You just have your R and maybe your silence. That's it. And that is not valuable. Over and over, they have buffed Garen's E AD ratio. And so over time, it's been so important to be able to actually buy the long swords you need, the items, whatever you might want to build. And I feel like with Spellbook, you have the option. Is my jungler pathing bot? I can go barrier. Is my jungler coming top? Is he going to come gank him post 6? Well, I can go exhaust and slow him. I can swap to ignite, And not only that, Cosmic Insight is one of the strongest runes you can go into a ranged top, because if you trade flashes with them at any point, then you have this huge window where you can end up being really aggressive, like in a way that you couldn't really find with Conqueror. So from what I've noticed, even in like master tier, like if I play on a master tier account, even in diamonds sometimes, I find that there's actually more kill windows with Spellbook than Conqueror. And not only that, it also keeps you safer if you really need to be safe. So that's my take on
Hmm.
it.
Before I attack that with your stance there, I'd really like to hear the opinions from our other Garen players. So for Elo, who's currently kind of the middle ground, right? You're a really high level Garen player playing a Masters, pushing for Challenger, and of course you've tried both. So what is your current take on what he just said versus my point?
Okay, so I very agree with every point that he said, but the issue I feel like is with Spellbook is that the more setups you take on Garen, the less mastery you have on each of them. So like if you run both Spellbook and Conqueror and let's say Storm Raider and Grasp, then there are so many things that you have to keep in mind when calculating your damage that it's never fully internalized. You have to keep track of your damage, of what secondary runes you have, and you don't really know your kill angles that well. You still have to think about your setups, which kind of destroys the point of OTPing for me, because the best part about OTPing is that you have zero mental stack put on the
Mm.
setup. And with Conqueror, you are less optimized for matchups, in my opinion, but you are better optimized as a player. And with enough mastery, you can make it work.
So basically what you're saying is you like to minimize variance to help you improve at other skills in the game. Focus more on your champ mastery as
Yeah,
a whole.
exactly.
Mm. What about for you, Ethan, who's someone who's recently done a big climb up to Emerald on Gaz? What's your take on all the setups? Because I know you gave Spellbook a try for me. And you normally like to run Conqueror. What's your stance on this? When you play up against range tops, do you feel like Conqueror is impossible, or what's your mindset currently?
My current mindset is I think more about mid game.
Mm.
I've only used Spellbook a few times, and it seems to be something that you use to get you to Stridebreaker, pretty much. I guess we'll talk about items later, but that's what it seems to be. For Emerald, I mean, like me as a player, usually if I'm against ranged, they're just going to push into me permanently anyways. So I'm not going to be as perma punished, and they might mess up their spacing, and I might be able to get onto them sometimes. So I feel like, yeah, maybe like getting an extra TP with Spellbook is helpful, but most of the time I'm just going to be able to get to Stride relatively okay, and then
Mm.
if I have Stride and Conqueror, if they just make one wrong step, I'm just one-shotting the team out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I
So,
definitely, yeah,
mm,
I feel having like exhaust and ignite sometimes in lane can open up certain things.
yeah. So one point that's kind of getting echoed here is it does get you to Stride Breaker a lot easier, right? The issue I have with this, and bringing it back to what Palco was saying, the issue I have with this is most games are decided in the first 13 to 14 minutes, especially in high ranked games. So if you're crippling yourself with a weaker setup that can't gain leads, even though it's easier to go even, it's going to be harder to gain advantages if they slip up, right? In an early skirmish, or if they make spacing mistakes, you're not going to have the power needed to actually capitalize. And I remember one game in particular, I tried Spellbook him. The Varus top just made a couple spacing mistakes, but he just stood there and face tanked me. And yes, if he was Zeus, he wouldn't make those mistakes. But my main point here is 99% not just in Emerald and Master GM, they're going to be making spacing mistakes. That's why Government King playing up against every game, probably playing against Cringe like Vayne, Varus, and Nivea, he can still get to challenge him against the best players in the world. And yes, if he played up against Zeus, I agree, he would get outspaced. But that's not because, Garen can't do anything about it. It's because Zeus has a better level of play in terms of that spacing mini game. So my argument for you, Palco, why not give yourself the highest early game power and put a lot of mental stack and energy into developing the melee versus range spacing mini game, like developing that skill as a whole?
I feel like ranged champions like Jace or Gnar or even Rumble, which is technically a melee. I think the
Oh,
problem
really?
is, yeah, I mean, you know
Yeah.
what I mean.
Yeah.
Like they have too many tools to keep the spacing like really unfair, like to the
Mm.
point where it's like it doesn't matter how well you click your mouse on their champion backwards or forwards. Like they have so many tools. Like okay, well like Jace uses his gate because you walked at him. Okay, now his gate is down. All right, cool. Let's try and Q at him now afterwards. Well, now he switches to melee form and he Lee Sin kicks us away. And they coded it to the point where like you can't even cue him as he's knocking away with his melee E. So to me, I've even tried like Conqueror Exhaust or like Conqueror Ignite, doesn't matter, right? Like all of this stuff plenty of times. And I realized there's just too many layers of help these champions have to keep you away from them because all you have, the only tool you really have is in some cases your W and also your Q. So to me, it's like I feel like I'm running into a brick wall at a certain point if they know how
Mm.
my champion works.
The issue I have with this is, again, bringing it back to the skill, because if you can imagine, let's just use Zeus again as the example. If he hasn't played Garen in years, probably. If he first time Garen into any GM or below Jace player, he's probably going to kill them in the first 6 levels, even though your Garen mastery is way higher than his, right? But his level of play in terms of clicking his character, reading when the range champ overcommitted for an auto, that type of thing, is extremely high. And that's a skill, of course, I'm not saying we can all get to Zeus level, but it's a skill everyone can improve on, even you and Chell or Ethan and Emerald, it doesn't matter. And I think especially for ranked Master and below, this mindset is very dangerous of fixing issues with runes or summoners. Because for Elo, for example, who's tried both, if he just played 100 games in a row of Conqueror Garen versus Ranged, and he focused purely in the review on his clicks and how he can punish spacing mistakes, he would be way better than if he did 100 games of Spellbook and got to Stridebreaker even.
I mean, I get that mentality completely. Like it makes complete sense and I understand. And I also do think like the threshold to get a kill is so much like it you have so much more wiggle room with Conqueror Axiom, especially like last stand on top of it. Like if you add all of that up for a Garen ult, if they like mess up and they lose even like maybe 10% of their health, sometimes you can literally just flash Q ignite R and they die. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like I've definitely seen those moments and I've tried it myself, of course. And I do think like it is applicable and you can absolutely climb with it. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just to me, it feels like every time I try, there's a lot of times where they just won't use they won't like allow that like to happen. Like if I go conquer ignite, they'll shift their playstyle around my rune setup. And I don't know if this is true, right? I don't want to like make any assumptions. But when I see the pick rate of Garen on Korea, this champion is almost never played, like almost never. And so for this reason, I think that like you have a little bit of an edge over playing this champion with a
Mm.
lot of mastery on him, by the way, like to basically exploit the lack of knowledge of Garen's kill windows and also just people not knowing like when they should use certain abilities versus him to kite him. I think like especially in Korea, there's so many more like windows and also the way they play so much more aggressive, all of these things on top of it, it does make Conqueror actually much more appealing, you know. But playing in Europe or playing in North America, from what I can tell, a lot of these players know exactly what to watch out for, to the point where it's like again like with those tools I mentioned, that a lot of range champions have to cut you with, it's just too much for you to ever like not just bleed out 30 CS and eventually get dove, all these things. You
Mm.
know what I mean?
My argument to this is you're saying a big benefit advantage Government King has is people don't know how to play against Garen, right? And I do agree, the
Yeah,
pick rate's
specifically on
way
Korea.
yeah, the pick rate's way lower, but straight up, if Government King played NA or EU with Conk Ignite Axiom, he would farm every single range top player because in Korea, the level of play, the level of skill, in terms of mechanics and spacing especially, it's just a completely different. I've played NA, EU, Korea, all of it, and that's probably the biggest difference. The way they move their characters and space you in lane, it's just unmatched compared to the other regions. So I think that would hard outweigh people not versing Garen that much because, yes, I get the point of versing a champion you're uncomfortable with, but it is Garen. It's not like it's a Neferi top with Halo Blade, you know, with a lot of options that you've just versed for the first time. I think he would have some advantages that way, but again, having to verse, you know, LCK players spacing him on Nara and stuff, that's gonna hard outweigh it. But I'd like to hear
Yeah, fair
from
enough. Yeah.
so Elo, I'll tag you in here. So what is your take on that in terms of, you know, server differences? Because you've watched Galvin King, you've watched Palco. What is your take from trying to
Yeah,
learn
I've,
from them?
I've watched both of them, and something I feel like is really doesn't give Gabon King justice is saying that he's just looking for spacing mistakes because his actual because like his YouTube channel is mostly just highlights of him trading, which creates I feel like some kind of myth that he's just perma looking to fight and perma
Mm,
outspacing people. But he's actually a very, very patient player, and he knows really well how to use this threat of Conqueror defensively to like first off control buffs that Spellbook I feel like doesn't really provide. Timo,
Mm.
let's say, with Ignite, can stat check in melee range a spellbook Garen in buff, and he can't do that with Conqueror Garen. And I feel like just the defensive threat of Conqueror is really underestimated. That they can't
Mm.
just run at you, they have to pay more attention to their spacing as well. And
Yep,
they can't
definitely.
bully you that hard.
So, Ethan, have you can be completely honest here, have
Yeah.
you watched either Palco, Garmon King? Have you studied much of the Challenger Garen players?
I've watched a good amount of Goblin King. I watched a lot of
Mm.
Airy Slash when he was around. I
Mm.
haven't watched much Falco.
That's all good.
Sorry, bro.
So,
But
that's
Yeah, no worries, bro.
but yeah, but I've watched a lot actually.
Mm.
Goblin King, yeah, I guess that's true. I haven't watched his full VODs, and it is edited in a way where you only see the trades, and it's kind of hard to learn from that sometimes because you don't see a lot of the wave control that builds up to it.
Mm.
Um, Something that you were talking about with diving, and I guess like a Plat Emerald perspective on diving, is in my opinion, the junglers in my games are not diving that often. Um, I don't know if
Yep,
that's
100%.
like relatively known. Yeah. That just doesn't happen that much. Uh, Usually if I do get dove, it's most likely because I made a huge mistake in my laning that gets me dove. And I'm sure as you get into like Masters and GM, sometimes it's just unplayable. But in general, when I think about my games or review them, if I'm getting solo dove by like a volley bear or by a jungler, it's because I had like a bad trade earlier.
Mm.
And it didn't matter what rune I had.
Yep, perfect. So a final question on this topic I want to ask for Palco is, I know you mentioned that when, a good player on Jace, if they leverage their E, their two E's, I guess, too many tools there, and space you extremely well, I agree. You don't have options, right? So if it's ChatGPT versus ChatGPT, I do agree that Garen with Conqueror won't kill Jace. But don't you think, even if you're versing high-ranked, challenger players, good players, you can develop that skill to a level, or do you think there's a cap?
I genuinely do think, and a lot of people have criticized me for this take, and I completely understand why. Brave, for example, criticized me a lot on this take where I said I don't think like there's anything you can do at a certain point when people understand the matchup in this way.
Hmm.
I've even watched Gabun King play versus a Jace who played exactly like this before, and I remember he was just saying like, "Hey jungler, I need my jungler. Where is my jungler?" You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he was down around like 30 CS, and I saw him really getting chunked out. And I'm not saying Gabun King is a bad player at all, by the way. That guy is incredible at the game. Um, I'm just saying, like, at a certain point, when I see people do these things, if I take Conqueror on Garen versus anyone who knows how the champion works with Conqueror, they play extra, extra careful to make sure that they
Hmm.
don't get hit by stuff. And you could argue that's good because then you get more breathing room. But the thing is, a lot of these champions still have so many tools to poke you with in safe ways that you're going to like the CS deficit is going to build up because you're not going to have that second wind. You're not going to have biscuit. You're not going to have barrier for when they dive you. And the higher elo you go, Grandmaster Challenger, there's going to be a support coming. As soon as you drop to a low HP, there's going to be a Bard coming top with Ignite Electrocute.
Hmm.
There's going to be a Rek'Sai, all of these things. You're not going to breathe enough with just only D shield as your sustain, in my opinion. And so I think,
Hmm.
yes, there is a cap to answer your question because at a certain point, you're just sort of waiting for your team to set things up for you. And I feel like that's
Hmm.
not consistent in solo queue.
Interesting. So I think the main thing we're going to disagree on, and that's going to be fine. We don't have to agree on everything, but it's the cap. I think when you get to Chell, especially, it's very hard to improve skills, right? Going from a 95 out of 100 to a 96 is way harder than going from 10 to 20, right? Of course. I don't think there's a
Yeah.
cap, though. I think that's definitely something you can always develop. And yeah, if you, let's say Garmin King had a 95 in terms of the skill, if he versus like that Jace you mentioned, like if he versus Zeus or King, he will lose. But I think he could still develop that skill. It'd be very hard, but even more. And to get to the point where he's beating humans, not AI, of course, but humans there. But my final question for you, and this is gonna help, hopefully for Elo, for Ethan, for all our Garen viewers, is like, do you think the average Garen player in Gold and Emerald should copy your approach, or go slow with my mindset of go conquer and learn how to punish range champions? Because of course, in lower ranks, they're gonna make a bunch of those mistakes, right? So I'm really curious your take there.
I've never said that, like, anyone should absolutely do this. Like, you must
Mm,
like, clickbait title, "You must go this. No
yeah.
no other option," It's so broken, like, I don't think that's the case, I think a lot of people have different approaches to League, and that's the fun part of League for me. That
Mm,
is why I actually go so many different rune pages. It's because I enjoy crafting, like, a new way to play the game for my champion, because I feel like Garen is such a binary champion when you play him as Conqueror Axiom every single game. I feel like he's just this one sort of way. And I feel like he gets so many different, like, unique play styles, even, and kill windows, etc. When you go, not even just Spellbook, if you go Grasp, if you go, Storm Raiders, whatever. I think it's really cool that you can do that. And I just like to play the game that way. If
mm,
you feel like, personally, Conquer is more lucrative, I think is the word. Like, if it's, if it makes sense to you and it works for you and you're not struggling, then go for it. Keep doing it. I'm
mm,
not going to knock it. Um, but if you are struggling with this setup and, of course, you can always improve on the spacing and all that, that mini game absolutely can be mastered to a point where you can hit Challenger on Garen with Conquer every game. I just think it's much harder and not as straightforward as this, solution, but it's
looking
really up
around,
to
yeah.
you.
Yep, makes
You can
sense.
slice it how you like.
So you don't have a one suits all. You're pretty flexible with the way you teach them.
Yeah, 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 for sure.
Perfect. All right. So moving on to the next topic here. In terms of when I was studying to make my Garen guide late last year, of course I watched the big three, right? Which was you, Palco, Garbun King, and Strain. And it was kind of like three rival gangs. You were on NA doing Spellbook, Stray was doing Phase Rush, and Garbun King was doing Conqueror. It was kind of interesting. And I'd really like to hear from Elo and Ethan. We'll start with Elo here. You've probably watched all three of them. What is your take?
Yeah.
How do you learn Garen for when there's three completely, not completely different, but very different ways to play?
So I think, and that's something I've struggled for a very long time, is that if you try to learn all of these play styles, then you sort of master none of them.
Mm,
And that's also why I don't like taking Spellbook and Conqueror, and why I'm right now taking only Conqueror. But I might as well could have been taking only Phase Rush, if Phase Rush was still a rune, and not Storm Raider, because Storm Raider is just not as viable as Phase Rush
mm,
to one trick. But if you go multiple different setups, you just don't learn 100% of it. And if you
mm,
swap between setups, then one game you, let's say, have Nimbus Cloak, and one game you have flat HP, and the next game you don't have them, and one game you win level 1, the next game you don't win, and you have to think
mm.
about it instead of like having it fully internalized and thinking only about gameplay. And I like to think only about gameplay. And I think
Awesome.
it kept me stuck for a very, very long time that I was just swapping between setups.
Yep, definitely. What about you, Ethan? Does that resonate with you?
Uh, a little. I never really swapped much between setups. I
Mm,
would I mean, phase rush being gone is just like a big thing that I'm still getting used to, honestly. Like I just tried out spellbook for the first time and I might take it sometimes, but I'm not really sure. I guess phase rush and spellbook are a little different because phase rush wasn't just for range champs. It was also for like hard melee matchups. Um, I guess I would usually just look up like a high elo VOD into a new matchup and see what rune they took and kind of see
mm.
how they played it. Uh,
But doesn't that make the journey harder for you? Because there are probably going to be two VODs of the same matchup, one with Conk, one with Phase, one with Spellbook. Doesn't that make it harder for you to learn it?
that's true. I never watched the spellbook ones. I've only
Mm.
tried
Okay,
spellbook
okay.
first, so that's like a new
Yeah,
thing. Um,
me
because
too.
honestly, I was just scared of using it, and I used it once, and it actually was easier than
Mm,
I thought. But um, but yeah, I mean, if I had a third one, going around, it probably wouldn't have helped.
Mm,
Especially in gold and silver, in my opinion. I
mm.
don't think I would have ever needed spellbook in gold and silver,
Yep,
and
makes
obviously
sense.
I didn't because I didn't use it.
Yep, makes
Um,
sense.
yeah.
So for Palco, because you've probably watched Stray and Galvin King as well, right? Almost guaranteed.
Yeah,
Is
plenty.
this
Yeah,
is
yeah,
this stuff
plenty.
that is this stuff that you learn from watching them add to your gameplay, or is it more so you're just interested in how they're playing in certain matchups?
Oh no, 1000%. I'm the type of player. I mean, as you can tell, I like to do all kinds of different things.
Mm,
And so a lot of what I did came from thinking about like what people are really good at as players and kind of just taking what I like about that, and applying it to myself. And I definitely, I absolutely go Conqueror Axiom in certain matchups where I think it's really OP, and I try and emulate Gabun King's playstyle, absolutely, where I think it's applicable. And same with Stray. Stray is more of like this like in between where he likes to consistency, kind of
mm,
maximum consistency with the phase rush scaling all the time, but he also still looks for those little short trades here and there where people slip up. It's this like really weird. I would say he's like this in between like me and Gabun King, where he
mm,
like still fights a lot with his scaling rune, but he has a scaling rune. I don't know how to describe it. It's really weird. He like always goes 10 CS a minute. That's the main thing about that guy, while also still applying pressure with like auto Q. He always does like auto Q run away. And so I do absolutely, take from both. And I think it's a good idea to do that as you're learning League.
mm,
I don't think you should absolutely subscribe to one kind of play style. I think it's, in my opinion, it's best if you can work on those skills that you like detect as you watch someone else,
mm,
and just
mm.
start adding it to your arsenal. So how I would call it.
My argument there is that perspective is from your point of view, right? As a multi-season challenger player on multiple servers. And if you asked me
Yep.
5 years ago, I'd have the same thing, right? Just take the best setup each matchup and just learn it. But
Yep.
after coaching for many years, I'm through till Chal. I think that's really overcomplicating it for the average player who, works full time, studies full time, plays maybe 2 or 3 games a day, 5 days a week. I think it's unrealistic to have a gold player or even Ethan, our king who's climbed up to Emerald, they'd be like, all right, you're going to take phase rush in this matchup and play this way, take spellbook in this, and just watch all three of the VODs and, take inspiration from all. I think from as a challenger player, that's something you can do quite, not maybe not easily, but consistently. But for the average player, I do think sticking to one style, kind of like what Elo was saying, and just focusing on the gameplay, streamlines your journey. Because at the end of the day, you'll probably agree this too. Gameplay is always the most important thing. You could climb to probably GM with Electrocute Garen or Airy or something, right? Gameplay is always going to be the best. So I think your point there for the average player to study everything, I think it's not realistic.
This is the thing I wouldn't say for the average player.
Mm,
Usually when I coach people, because I do a little bit of coaching on the side, and I always ask people the first thing before we get into it, and we look at the OPGG is, what is your goal with League? Like, do you just want to hit Diamond 4?
mm,
Do you want to be against the best players in the world? Like, what's going on here? And so that is the first thing I always ask, and I actually do make an effort when I'm teaching people to make sure that like, okay, like let's make something very simple. If our goal is just Diamond 4, we want to hit Diamond 4, chill, great. Let's go the same thing most games so we're not
mm,
overcomplicating it. But I think a lot of people, League is such a competitive game. And especially like once people start getting to Emerald, Diamond, Master, which is a majority of people I teach, um, that's when it starts to become more like you got to start expanding your horizons, in my opinion. You
mm.
can't just like laser focus on this one thing because I think you're limiting yourself in a lot of ways that way. That's just my opinion, though, right? I don't think it's absolutely true,
So
but that is just my style.
if you were to
Yeah,
coach Ethan now, you'd want him to try a bit of everything because he's trying to push from Emerald to Diamond to Master. You'd want
yeah,
him to
yeah.
experiment.
That's what. Yeah, that's. I would probably try and encourage that. But if he didn't want to, I wouldn't be like, oh, you have to do this. If
Yeah.
he wants to play Conqueror, go for it, bro. We can work it out. I've climbed to Challenger with Conqueror only before. I know how to do it, but it's
Mm.
it's harder in my opinion.
Yeah. My problem with that though is as the coach, as you coaching him or me coaching him, it's kind of your responsibility to set him the a way that he can do it optimally, right? Don't just be like, oh, try both, do whatever you like. I think it's a bit, it'd be make more sense for his journey if you were to give him like, this is what I think you should do to climb from Emerald to Diamond to Master. I don't think you like, again, trying to simplify the journey for the average player. I think a lot of your takes here, they make a lot of sense, but they are from the through the lens of multi-season challenger, which is what you are. But it's not really resonating for the average player's experience because if right now you told Ethan, "Oh, just cook around with all of it, do what you like," I think that's gonna make his journey harder.
Yeah, I mean, like, if I were to be coached by either one of you, and I mean, I've been coached by Chippys before, but like, I do think there is something to say about multiple play styles. Would you guys agree that like these kind of are the two only play styles? Like, it kind of is just Spellbook and Conk these days, other than there's the new rune. But
Yeah, Storm Raiders is pretty weak
yeah,
Mm,
overall.
um, I do think that like if there was a top lane champion to learn multiple play styles on, Garen could be the champ
mm,
because of the mechanical simplicity and like
Mhm.
relatively forgiving nature. I also think it would depend because I mostly like am I would say I'm like a Garen OTP now. But maybe if I wasn't, that would change things too.
mm. My
Mhm.
take
There's
on
like
that
a little bit of a
is
distinction.
even though Garen is one of the more simple top lane champs, League of Legends is still super complicated. So even if you're doing it on Garen, you have to work on wave control, when to split, when to team fight, team fighting execution. You also want to work on, all right, so phase, we'll just use phase as an example. Phase in this matchup, spellbook, or grasp in this one. Grasp is another playstyle I've seen Palco use that we'll touch on later. But I
Oh yeah.
still think, yeah, even though Garen is a more simple champ, you don't want to overcomplicate League of Legends as a whole for the average player.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have never even tried Grasp. That's true.
All right, moving on to itemization. So one really my top priority here is Palco. I've noticed a lot of builds where you skip stride break here. And for me, I think this is against the law. I think this is Camille skipping Triforce levels of you just can't do that. So what is your take here? Why do you think Triforce on Garen can outperform Stride?
So I feel like Shroudbreaker is one of the least gold efficient items
Hmm.
you can buy, in my opinion. There's several reasons for this. There's a lot of champions where I would say, what's a good example? Maybe like Mbessa or Camille. If I'm facing one of those champions, if I go Shroudbreaker versus those characters, I feel like them with Camille's Triforce or Mbessa's Eclipse, for example, is such a big difference in like stats for how much damage those items do. And I think Garen's kit on his own like isn't enough to make up for the fact that those champions on their one item spikes are so powerful. And so in order to match that kind of power, in my opinion, it's really, really important to have extra damage. Garen's actually really good at activating Triforce. He can QE, and then it's not going to come up on his E, of course, but then he can use W, or he can even start the trade with W and get like another. He gets like two Garen Qs, basically. I think that's just so OP sometimes. I have won so many games that I would have not won if I didn't have Triforce, mainly because there's just so many interactions in the game where I feel like you can't always play for Garen's spin. Because the main strength of Garen's spin with Stridebreaker is that it's really easy to hit the whole thing. And so if you like to play Conquer every game, I think it becomes much stronger to have Conk plus Stride because that actually
Hmm.
helps you stack up your Conqueror so easily. But let's say you're playing Grasp or you're playing Spellbook. I still go Triforce with Conqueror, but not as commonly. Um, I feel like sure, like that argument's valid because then it's really hard to even use your rune if you don't have Stridebreaker. But I just think Triforce is such an underrated item, especially if you're split pushing. I think Stridebreaker offers very little value. I think it's a very good utility like team fight item, or it helps you catch up to certain champions that are squishy. But if there's a champion that's just going to be smacking you in the face, what's the point of slowing them and speeding
Hmm.
yourself up? I think I'd rather have more damage.
I get the logic there, but even when you're breaking down the Triforce combo, like QE, wait out the whole spin, and then W, or it just for me, it doesn't make sense on Garen. I do agree Triforce is a bit underrated, but not on Garen. If you think about the actual Triforce users, like Jackson Camille, Jax W Camille Q, spammable low CD auto resets, right? Garen doesn't really have that. You might get 2 Qs sometimes, but I think more often than not, Stridebreaker will just outperform, and then That's not even talking about skirmishes and team fights where you're not really a champ. Like, you can't actually reach people without Stridebreaker. Kind of stealing your logic from before, laning with Conqueror against a good Jace. If you team fight versus a good AD carry, a good mage player, and you don't have Stridebreaker, how are you actually going to reach them and do anything?
Well, I mean, I fixed this problem by building a ton of move speed. I will usually
Mm,
go Ghostblade and Phantom Dancer together with this combination, maybe even a Dead Man's. So then you're up to like 3 move speed items altogether. And what happens is you're basically front loading your damage like crazy. You still have the ability to catch up to a lot of champions, especially if you play for side lane flanks and you're not just front to backing them. I think it's very possible with Flash, like you just split push for most of the game of Triforce, and then you show up to the team fight, you flash on the ADC with the Triforce damage, and it's just a silly amount of damage. How much it is? It is
mm,
even more kill pressure than Stridebreaker, in my opinion, for those angles. So to me, like, I feel there's just so many moments where you're missing out on kill windows by not going Triforce because of how much damage
mm,
it really does. You could say, like, sure, you can't continue to proc Triforce over and over and over, but you're using Triforce in a different way here. You're not using it to activate it over and over on cooldown. Even though the cooldown is really low, you would think that, oh, I want to consistently proc this. It's actually like an assassin item on Garen to an extent. It is so much damage, just that little bit of extra amount. It's the same reason why we go Axiom Arcanist and, Conqueror Axiom. It's because we want to have that little bit of extra one-shot power, and I think Triforce achieves that excellently.
mm. What about for you, Elo or Ethan? Have you tried Triforce versus Stride? Starting with Elo?
Okay, so while I myself go stride every single game, because just for the sake of consistency, I think Palco makes an excellent point, and I can't disagree with him. Triforce is just a way better item in stat-wise. Stridebreaker is an item that puts a lot of power value into the active, into this slav that slows and speeds you up. And if you don't need this slav, because you are versus, let's say, Camille, so you just have to stat check her, then there isn't really any value from the Stridebreaker.
Okay. What about for you, Ethan? Have you tried out Triforce?
Never tried it.
Respect.
Uh,
No cooking around here.
no,
Got work to do.
I don't know if I ever would. I could
Mm,
see, like, I can understand the mindset of like the one shot, and I definitely get like the stat value. I just feel that in my elo and the spacing of the people I play against, Stride is just insta death for them,
mm,
especially if I'm strong. So why
yeah.
not go it every time?
Yeah, it'll definitely give you more threat. And one thing I want to end on for this topic is you mentioned you bridged the gap of not having stride utility by building MS items, but you're not getting your second item till 20 minutes, third item till like 26, 27. That's super late into the game. The one core is so important on Garen. Rocking up level 11 while everyone else is level 9 with your stride breaker. I think that's just such an underrated part of the game where you can change the outcome. And Triforce, it'll give you more damage 1v1 versus the Camille, but less threat on everyone else. So, one more thing I want to touch on in terms of setup here is even in the games you take Conqueror for Palcom, I see a lot of time you run Inspiration Secondary with a little bit of cashback, jack of all trades. What's the logic here?
So I was taking inspiration quite literally from Viper. Recently, I've been studying this guy's VODs a lot more, not only because I only want not to only look at Garen players, but I also want to try and take from some of the best players in solo queue. And I think it's
Mm,
a really good idea to do, especially when he mains a champion that, in my opinion, is actually a little bit similar to Garen in the way Riven works compared to Garen. I feel like Garen is also a manaless champion that is mainly gated by long cooldowns, like especially on his W, since his W is so powerful. So having a little bit of extra haste and going Ionian boots stacks up your jack of all trades so quickly with a D blade or a Doran's helm now, which is even better. You just are able to rack up those unique stats so fast on Garen because he has so many different unique stats that he builds, and he scales with a lot of different things. And cashback is just a extra top up, like cherry on the top, um, you know,
mm,
scaling, snowballing type of rune that I really like. Since Garen is really good at catching so many sideline waves and having good wave clear and moving around the map to get picks on the map with his flash cooldown. I feel like he benefits so much from cashback as well. And I realized that Viper goes these runes on Riven no matter what, every single game. And I was like, hold on, this is really OP for carrying solo queue games. And I feel like Garen is in a similar lights or similar aspect to Riven in this way, the way he
Mm.
wants to play the map. And so I just kind of realized that this is good on Garen as well. And yeah, that's sort of where that came from.
I really like the idea of studying players that are top in their role, even if they don't play your champs, right? Like Viper, or maybe you watch Raider. The one thing I have here, the one issue I have with this is, aren't you just missing out on so much threat and kill windows from not having Axiom and Celerity? Because the main difference between Garen and Riven is, of course, mobility gap, right? And I'd say Riven has more threat early game, pre-1 item than Garen. So without Axiom, without Celerity, even though you scale a little bit better, you're lowering your threat even more. If they were to make a mistake or give you lethal that you might have had with Axiom or Celerity, or ideally both.
So, in my opinion, I think there's absolutely cases where Axiom is warranted and is absolutely the better choice, mainly
Mm,
because there's certain matchups where you need to burst them down really fast. And just that little bit of extra damage on your ult plus last stand value is crazy if you're playing against like a Darius or an Olaf or
mm,
Zahen, any of those champions that are going to stick on you and they don't really give you a choice of, oh, I want to play for a short trade. I want to play around my a bunch of CDR I built. You don't really have a choice. You have to one shot that champion before they one shot you. And so I feel Axiom and Celerity is excellent versus those characters. But if I'm playing against a Cassante or I'm playing against what's a good example? I don't know, Riven as well. The matchup changes. It's not just about having that extra damage from Axiom or that tiny little bit of extra move speed from Celerity. It becomes a lot of matchups, let's say I'm against Irelia, it becomes more about how often can I have my W to build up the short trades to get them low enough to one shot them?
mm,
And so, not only this, like with Jote, you get a little bit of haste, you get around 5 or 6 by the time you're getting your first base. You also go haste shard on top of it, and you also go Ionian boots. And once you get 5 stacks on your Jack of all trades, you're already getting 6 bonus AD from your rune. So it's like a better gathering storm to me because you
mm,
get it so quickly. And you're pretty much sitting at around 23 haste on your first base, which is insanely powerful versus certain champions, where the matchup revolves around Garen's W over just one big one shot on an all in. Because a lot of the matchups in top lane right now are all about short trades and building up their HP bar to get them low. And I feel like it's so easy to do this when you have a lot of haste.
Yep, I can see that. All right, so we're going to be finishing up with the matchup. So right here, I've got the matchup tier list for Garen that Gabon King actually made for me. Our rank 1 challenger Garen from Korea. So we're going to get everyone's take on it, and maybe Palco will move it around and see his experience in these matchups based on the different servers he's played in. So starting with Ethan, when you look at this matchup tier list, climbing from silver to emerald, what are some things that are just outrageous to you?
Jax is easy. The Jax players are way too bad in gold and silver and
Yep,
emerald. You can just eat on them. They have no sustain. Yeah. I don't
makes
think I've
sense.
ever lost that matchup a single time, which like sounds ridiculous, but like, I don't know. I'd also say Cassante is easy because they're just bad. Yeah, I'd say in general, I definitely agree with like tanks and weak early game champions because Garen is thought as a weak early game champ, but you can actually abuse your conk a lot level 1 versus these champs. You can get push, you can control the whole lane versus champs like Jace, Quinn, Vayne. Vayne is probably the hardest one in my opinion.
Mm,
Um it's just some of these lanes are impossible.
yep, makes sense. What about for you, Elo? Does this look pretty similar to your experience?
Uh, so first thing I would say is in the hard section, we have a lot of matchups that just don't deserve to be on the same tier. Like
Mm,
Tryndamere is an absolute hell of a matchup. It's completely unplayable. He counters you with every single inch of his existence, especially since his mini rework, so his W just removes your passive regardless of how you stand, which is not something a lot of Tryndamere players know, but he can just W at any point and it will deactivate your passive. Meanwhile, something like a Queen is very, very manageable. With Conqueror, maybe less. I haven't played versus her with Conqueror yet, but with Spellbook, I would maybe even argue she is Garen favored. I just don't see how she's supposed to win versus Garen. You just easily out-sustain her and then just start running at her and killing her. So I would like create maybe a impossible and hard category, while still keeping in mind that impossible can make mistakes, and you win the impossible matchups simply by not making mistakes. They will make mistakes, you don't need to. Yeah.
For Palco, so I'm not sure if you've seen this or not, but I'm really interested in your take as well. Goblin King playing Challenger on a different server to you. Does this look pretty spot on, or do you feel like he missed the mark on a lot from your experience?
I wouldn't say that he missed the mark on a lot. I think a lot of it's quite accurate, but there are definitely like a few things that stand out that I disagree with strongly. For example, Riven matchup. I played against Viper on his EU climb recently, and afterwards he added me to do some 1v1s to learn the matchup. So if that doesn't tell you something about how Garen favored it is, then I don't know what else to tell you. I think it's a very easy matchup for Garen if you know like
Very
how to
easy.
play around.
You'd move
Yes,
it
I
down
think
here.
it's like yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's
Damn.
very easy. Mainly because with the Jack of all trades and Hayshard like combination with maybe Ionia boots, you can also go tabbies. Either are fine. Your W cooldown is just so low, and her only window to kill you is when you don't have W, and she has 0 sustains, so it's super easy to keep short trading with her when your Q is such a low cooldown. So I think it's very Garen favored for that reason.
Interesting.
I think I agree with Jax being opponent favored actually, because at a really high level, I feel like Jax has a lot of windows to all in Garen when he doesn't have W. I've played against TF Blade in this matchup quite a few times, and I feel he's definitely just better at the game straight up, which makes a big part of it the way it is. But I do think also like Jax has a lot of angles in lane to squeeze out a lead before Garen outscales him at Stridebreaker, because Garen can shorten the
Mm.
trade whenever he wants. So I definitely think it's opponent favored in
Do you
high elo
think
just because
this
of the
just so I can farm you
yeah.
for info as the Jax player, do you think you should take Lethal Tempo or Grasp as Jax?
I think lethal tempo and teleport is the best setup. That's what
Mm.
TF Blade goes versus me all the time. And he also goes cookies. And I think it's very strong. I think there's so many windows to kill Garen past his W cooldown, especially if the Garen runs Axiom, which he probably will.
Mm.
So yeah, I think it's really good for Jackson Lane. I also think Quinn is, like Elo said, very easy matchup. I have not met a single Quinn
Very
player
easy.
that
Yep.
has. I wouldn't say it's very easy, but I'd
Down
say it's
here.
Garen favored. No,
Okay.
no, no. It's in Garen favored tier, mainly because I think she does have some good scaling. She's still a marksman, so if she buys LDR, she does outscale you. She's ranged, of course, and she has so much tempo on the map the entire early game, which could be a problem if your team needs you for something. She's gonna have Grub's Prow probably, but once you get Stridebreaker, it's literally Jover for her. She has no way to play in side lane. I think every single time any sums are up, that you have with Stridebreaker, she's just dead. There's no counterplay. Um, what else? I think Heimer is not a hard matchup, mainly because Spellbook nullifies his early game so strongly. I would say it's maybe more of a skill matchup, because I've ran into some Heimers on EU that give me trouble before I can scale up and hit my stride. But once I get stride, this guy's life is also over. He's pretty much gapped the entire game. I think Heimer scales really poorly. He's very dominant in lane though, so he can squeeze out a lead. What else? I think Zach is playable. It's definitely opponent favored, but I think with the haste as well, the really nice thing about haste versus Zac is that you one shot him with your R. Let's say you get him low enough to one shot him with short trades, but then Garen often struggles to kill his passive afterwards, and then he just respawns, and you just die because he's got a bunch of health to work with again,
Mm.
and you have no ult to execute him. But if you run haste and you kill him with your E and your R at the same time, your E will be up to kill all of his little blobs instantly. So I think the matchup's much more playable if you adjust your setup this way. I think everything else in the hard category is accurate, though. Those champions are really tough to play against if they're really good. What else? I think Darius should be in hard, to be honest. I played against Raider a few times, and I think at the highest level, the matchup is really, really bad. I tried multiple setups as well, and I just think no matter what you do, you're going to be not having fun. I also think Kale is hard. I don't know how it would be opponent favored. I remember when Desperate Nasus was in Korea, Gabon King had a 0% win rate versus him. So that matchup's also really bad, unless you mechanically gap her somehow. It's really, really tough, but she gets so much move speed to work with, it's nigh impossible. Um, What else we got here? I think Mbessa is actually Garen favored if you go the Grasp QMax
Interesting.
because unless she's really good at spacing, there's not a single Mbessa on EOS that has gave me trouble yet.
Yeah,
If I go
that's the
Grasp and
problem.
I QMax with Sheen, it's not really losable in my opinion. I played NAEU after I started doing this. I never lost, but who knows, right? Maybe I need to take a trip to Korea, man.
Yeah,
Maybe my
come on
life
by.
maybe my life would change.
Stop on
Yeah,
by.
for sure.
These Korean investors give me nightmares, and the Rumbles too. You have to come
Oh,
first
for
some.
sure. No, Rumble is one I'm sure they're too good at.
Mm,
What else? I think rest of it is fine. I think Irelia is Garen favored, because if you rush tabbies, it doesn't really matter how much she dashes to avoid your E or your Q.
mm,
I think you just get so much time if you hold on to your E. If you wait until she deletes the wave with her Q running away from you, you just walk up, auto her, auto, and eventually you just E her when she has nothing to use to dash away from. It's probably similar to the way Jax plays it. So I don't know why you would just like use E right away and then let her give her a chance to run away. So that's my opinion on that. What
What about the new
else?
champs in the
None of
meta?
these things I'm saying.
What about these new champs in the meta, by the way?
These new ones. So I played against this guy called Tissue One. He's really good at Anivia. He's the best
Mm,
Anivia on EOS. I think he got like top 5 or something
damn.
early in the season. He was really good. Everyone was copying him, all of the pro players afterwards. But I did a little bit of talking with him, and we found out that if Garen goes double adaptive flat HP, second wind unflinching with Spellbook, then she doesn't really have any counterplay because her mana pool is really weak in lane, so she struggles with champions that can just shove the wave. So I think it's Garen favored, only ever so
Mm,
slightly, but because he will always have tempo on Anivia, and he can always move to fights first, and he's still going to be strong in fights. He can swap to Ignite at 6 minutes, all of these things. And if you have those early game runes and that sustain, it's really no issue. Varus is probably the worst matchup in the game, mainly because not only does he outscale you, he also has utility. He also beats your ass in lane, makes you go down 30, 40 CS, even if you go spellbook. Um, it's just insane, that champion. It's absolutely insane. I think unless you counterpick
yep.
him, he's just really OP. So TF top, I play against Arthua a bunch. He's really good TF top OTP. Um, I would say it's actually a skilled matchup. You know what's crazy? I go Conquer Axiom versus TF
Let's
because
go.
I think TF has 330 base movement speed and he has no movement in his kits. The only thing he can use to kite you is his gold card, and you can W it. And if you go
Mm,
Tenacity Shard with Conquer Axiom, you can actually consistently get on top of him and stat check him. So yeah, Zahan, I think it's I played against Stray's Zahan. Um, we both agree that it seems to be Garen favored slightly, ever so slightly, but it is kind of a skill matchup, I would say, actually, for most people. But I think I also go Conquer Axiom in this matchup, and I think Garen just has too many tools to one-shot Zehen before he can
mm.
stack his passive. So, yeah. Other than that, though, I think this list looks really good. I wouldn't really disagree with anything else.
All right, everyone. I think we'll call it for today. A lot of good points here. I appreciate everyone to take the time. And yeah, I'll see you for the next one.